Welcome to Despicable Me Deep Dive Podcast. Today on the show, psychological warfare tactics. We're diving into the murky waters of psychological tactics that can, well, in essence, turn you into a puppet. We'll be looking at how these manipulations work, often using your own mind against you.
Yeah, it's a pretty fascinating area, though. Definitely unsettling. We'll be drawing insights from a document that explores a whole bunch of these psych tricks.
Yeah.
And what really jumps out, is the kind of paradoxical nature of these techniques. The very things that make us human, trying to be reasonable, empathy, needing connection, they can get twisted.
Right, twisted and used to control you. Absolutely. So get ready to have your understanding of influence, maybe even control, challenged a bit. Think of this like getting a peek behind the curtain at the puppet show of the mind. We'll throw in a few sarcastic analogies, too, just to keep things, well, darkly amusing, I guess. Okay, let's unpack this. First up, one of the real masterstrokes in the puppeteer's playbook. Gaslighting.
Gaslighting, yeah. And it's like so much more than just telling lies, It's really a systematic campaign to mess with your reality, make you doubt your own sanity, your grasp on what's even true. The real power of it lies in making you your own enemy, questioning yourself, eroding that internal compass, recognizing that self-doubt is key here. It's a red flag, not some personal failing.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like someone keeps moving your keys and then looks at you all concerned, saying, are you sure you left them there? Maybe you're forgetting things. And here's a really messed up paradox. The better someone is at gaslighting you, the less likely you are to actually believe it's happening. You might even start thinking, oh, wow, maybe I am losing my memory. Basically becoming your own, personal gaslighter.
Exactly. As you'll see in the source material, the more effective it is, the more invisible it becomes to the person experiencing it. You start internalizing that doubt, questioning not just specific events, but maybe even your basic ability to perceive reality accurately.
So how does this specific flavor of mental puppetry work? Like, what are the actual strings they're pulling?
Well, it often starts really subtly, denying things you know happened, but calmly, repeatedly, maybe expressing concern for you. Are you okay? You seem a bit stressed lately. Maybe you misremembered. It's all designed to plant that first little seed of self-doubt.
And that seed can grow into a whole jungle of uncertainty, can't it? Because here's a nasty loop the document points out. The more you second-guess your memory, the more you start looking to the gaslighter, the very person messing with your reality for confirmation. It's like asking the arsonist for fire safety tips. It's nuts.
And the more you seek that validation from them, the more power they gain to define what's real for you. It just erodes your internal sense of truth. What's fascinating, though, and maybe a bit counterintuitive, is that gaslighting often works best on rational, intelligent people.
Wait, hold on. The smarter you are, the more vulnerable you are. That sounds completely backwards. How does that work?
It does seem weird, right? But think about it. A logical mind tries to make sense of inconsistencies. So when a gaslighter presents this distorted reality, a sharp mind will often try hard to reconcile it with their own perception. They overthink, they doubt themselves. Their own intelligence kind of becomes a tool the gaslighter can use against them, helping that false narrative take root.
Wow. So the brain power that should protect you actually ends up helping the manipulation along. Yeah, that's twisted puppet mastery right there. And the document mentions the power of just repeating it and the tone. It's not just the lie, but the calm, maybe concerned way they say it.
Exactly. A lie told once, maybe you brush it off, but repeated calmly, consistently, maybe with that fake concern in their voice. It slowly eats away at your certainty. It creates this dissonance between what you know happened and what they're telling you happened.
It makes truth feel bendy, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like, it's not this solid, unbreakable thing, but something you can kind of twist if you're persistent enough.
That's a good way to put it. Gaslighting really reveals how fragile our connection to truth can sometimes be. It's not always this robust, objective force. It can be surprisingly pliable under that kind of persistent denial. And here's another uncomfortable paradox the document brings up. The more someone gaslights you, the more guilty you might start to feel.
Guilty. For what? For sticking to what you know is true. That sounds completely insane.
And that's the insidious part. The constant denial, the subtle suggestions that you're confused or overreacting, it can make you feel like you're the one causing the conflict just by insisting on your version. You might start apologizing, softening your words just to avoid the fight, avoid feeling like you're being unkind.
So you end up bending not because you're wrong, but just because you're emotionally worn down. Truth doesn't just shatter, it gets worn away by constant friction.
Exactly. And if you do manage to call them out on something specific, a good gaslighter might cleverly shift the focus. Instead of addressing the lie, they might focus on your tone or your emotions. Wow, why are you getting so worked up? Are you sure you're not overreacting? Now you're defending your feelings, not the facts.
You're thrown off balance, yeah.
Yeah.
Trying to explain how you're saying something instead of what you're actually saying.
Yeah.
Like they moved the goalposts of the argument without you even realizing it.
Precisely. And this can lead to something really disturbing. Internalized gaslighting. You actually start doing it to yourself, automatically assuming you're wrong, your memory's bad, you're overreacting. Even when the gaslighter isn't around, the puppet master doesn't even need to pull the strings anymore. The puppets learn the dance.
That's a bleak picture.
It is, and the document really emphasizes the invisibility of effective gaslighting. The less noticeable it is, the more potent it becomes. Any resistance from you might just lead to more guilt, more blame being heaped on you, reinforcing their control. It's kind of a no-win situation. Fight back, feel worse, give in, your reality warps.
And it points out that gaslighting often uses this veneer of softness, right? Not yelling, but calm denial, a gentle shrug, maybe a concerned look. That makes it so hard to spot as deception. We kind of expect manipulation to be loud, but this often whispers its lies, like a wolf in sheep's clothing. But the clothing is a really, really calm therapist sweater.
Right. And once it's taken root, you might start fighting for the truth of what happened and just start trying to feel sane. The paradox is, you might not even care as much about what actually happened anymore. Your main concern becomes your own mental stability. You might even ditch the truth just to feel like you're not broken or alone, sacrificing reality for a bit of peace. That's a heartbreaking trade-off.
And the document raises this chilling idea. What if the gaslighter actually believes their own distortions? What if they've gaslit themselves?
That adds this whole other creepy layer, doesn't it? The abuser might genuinely believe their twisted reality, which makes their denials feel utterly sincere to you. They might truly think you're the confused one. So who do you believe? Them. Yourself. Neither feels safe.
It really just highlights how fragile our grip on reality can be. Memory isn't perfect, feelings aren't always reliable indicators, and doubt creeps in so easily. Makes you wonder how much we believe is true just because no one's really challenged it.
And if they did challenge it, would you stand firm? Or would you start to fold? That's a deeply unsettling question the document leaves you with about gaslighting. Okay, maybe let's shift gears to another tactic. This one starts out feeling, well, amazing, actually. Love bombing.
Yes, love bombing. The romantic equivalent of being hit by a fire hose of affection. Someone just suddenly showers you with this overwhelming amount of attention, praise, gifts, like they've mainlined adoration or spraying it all over you.
Yeah, exactly. It feels like the beginning of a movie romance, but as the document points out, it's often just the setup for a trap. And here's the core paradox for you. The more someone gives you at the start, the more they can potentially take away later. That intense adoration can actually lead to this profound hollowness and dependence down the line. It's like they build you up on this huge pedestal of compliments, but the pedestal is made of really shaky Jenga blocks.
And real love, as the document notes, usually grows slowly, right? It's gradual, building connection and trust. Love bombing just skips all that.
It feels fast because it isn't really love. It's a calculated tactic. You feel overwhelmed not because they genuinely know you, but because they don't need to. You're not targeted for who you are, but just because you're there and receptive to all that attention. It's like they're not seeing you. They're seeing a blank canvas for their ideal partner fantasy.
And all that over-the-top praise, it can really silence your inner voice, can it? That little part of you that might normally say, this feels a bit much.
Precisely. That flood of affirmation can just drown out your self-doubt, your critical thinking. You start believing the hype. Your walls come down fast, which is exactly what the love bomber wants. They don't necessarily want your heart. They want your surrender. It's like you're getting so much positive feedback that you stop noticing your own sense of self is kind of eroding. Drowning in compliments, but losing your ability to breathe on your own.
The document highlights the danger in how perfect it feels. The more flawless that initial connection seems, the more likely it is to be a strategy. Real relationships have bumps. Love bombing feels artificially smooth, like astroturf instead of real grass.
And then comes the inevitable shift, right? Once they feel like they've got you hooked emotionally, the love bomber starts pulling back that attention, the compliments stop, the texts get less frequent, the warmth cools off.
And that's when the panic kicks in. Not necessarily because you did anything wrong, but because you've been trained, conditioned to need their constant attention to feel okay. You start desperately trying to get back that initial adoration, bending over backwards, not realizing the withdrawal was part of the plan all along. It's like they've trained you like Pavlov's dog, but instead of a bell, it's constant affection. and the reward is their approval. When it's withheld, you scramble, thinking, what did I do wrong?
Exactly. You become conditioned to crave their approval and absolutely fear their silence. You get emotionally addicted to something that was never actually real. You were lifted way up just so the fall would be that much harder. It's so confusing because you remember how amazing it felt at first. You cling to those memories, trying to make sense of the sudden coldness, so you end up blaming yourself when the love bombing stops. What did I do wrong? That's the question looping in your head.
But, as the document points out, you didn't necessarily do anything wrong, you were just part of their pattern. And here's another chilling thought. The love bomber might actually believe they did love you initially. They might have genuinely felt that intense rush themselves, which just highlights how twisted this manipulation is. They could be victims of their own delusion in a way that's really unsettling.
And they might even use that initial phase against you later. Absolutely. They might say, but I gave you everything. I treated you like a queen. No one will ever love you like I did. And yeah, the initial intensity felt good, but it wasn't sustainable or genuine. But you might start to believe them, thinking you'll never feel that again, even though the feeling was based on manipulation. So you end up missing the illusion, longing for that magic, even when you kind of know it was a tactic, like craving a mirage in the desert.
Precisely. And that longing can keep you stuck, trying to revive something that only existed to pull you in. They might use silence or distance as punishment, and it hurts more because you've been rewired to equate their love with your own worth. The love wasn't a gift, it was bait.
And yet part of you still wonders, but what if some of it was real? That doubt can be incredibly powerful. It is. You doubt your instincts, replay everything, trying to separate the truth from the performance. But love bombing mixes them so well that even when you suspect it's manipulation, that lingering question can keep you trapped. Now, the document also touches on other tactics that feed into this feeling of being controlled, like information overload.
Oh yeah, the classic ground them in data move.
Yeah.
Like asking a simple question and getting a 5-volume encyclopedia thrown at you in response.
Exactly. Presenting so many options, so much info, that it just leads to paralysis. The paradox here is that more information can actually lead to less agency, less ability to act. You get so overwhelmed you can't make a decision, and you end up just relying on the manipulator's guidance, like being in a supermarket with 1,000 types of cereal. You just grab the familiar one or give up. And then there's the wonderfully uncomfortable tactic of using silence as a weapon.
Weaponized silence. Yeah. On the surface, silence seems like peace, right? Space, calm. But when it's used intentionally, it becomes this really potent tool of pressure, control, punishment. It's like the emotional equivalent of the silent treatment, but, weaponized. And the paradox is, by saying absolutely nothing, someone can communicate volumes.
Precisely. The lack of words creates this emotional vacuum, and your own anxiety and self-doubt rush in to fill it. You're left with nothing solid to respond to, no accusation to argue against. So you start filling the void yourself, usually with self-blame, replaying everything, wondering what you did to cause the silence.
Exactly. The silence becomes this mirror reflecting your own fears back at you.
Right.
Your guilt, your insecurities. The longer it goes on, the more convinced you become that you're the problem. And then comes the trap. You start chasing, trying to break the silence, apologizing, explaining, offering solutions. And the less the manipulator gives, the more you offer. It creates this huge power imbalance where you're constantly trying to appease someone who isn't even engaging.
And here's the really infuriating part. They can claim complete innocence the whole time. I didn't do anything, they might say. And technically, it's true. They didn't yell, didn't insult, they just withdrew. But that withdrawal can be incredibly damaging, sometimes cutting deeper than harsh words ever could. It's like being emotionally erased, not just ignored. And the silence doesn't tell you the rules, it just punishes you for breaking them, often without you even knowing what you did wrong.
Exactly. The paradox is you might even start craving any reaction, even a negative one, because at least that would be something to respond to. Silence just leaves you trapped with questions and no way out. It becomes this quiet form of dominance, not through aggression, but through the refusal to engage.
And the manipulator learns that silence can be incredibly effective in controlling your behavior. They don't even have to be right. They just have to wait for the discomfort of the silence to make you give in. Precisely. The one who walks away into silence often wins that power dynamic. And they maintain this innocent facade, looking like they're doing nothing while you're falling apart trying to figure it out. Sometimes they might even interact normally with others while completely ignoring you, which just amplifies the impact.
It's like public shaming without saying a word directly to you. They're fine with everyone else, just not you. Sends a very clear, very cold message. And the document notes you might even start defending them to others saying, oh, they just need space, Well, deep down, you know it's punishment dressed up as stillness.
And eventually, you might stop speaking too, not out of strength, but just sheer exhaustion. And now the silence spreads, creating this tense standoff where every quiet moment feels heavy. Even if they eventually break the silence, it leaves a mark, right? A lingering anxiety in future interactions. You start hearing echoes of it even when they're talking, like the silence becomes this memory haunting the present. And the most twisted part is that silence, which should be peaceful, can feel more damaging than a fight, like being emotionally muted.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Leaves no visible bruises, but it can break something deep inside.
Mm.
Doesn't scream, but it shouts through every second of nothing, often getting the last word in your head. Okay, let's delve into another fascinating, slightly complex one. Triangulation.
Triangulation, the classic move of bringing a third wheel into a relationship, not for fun, but to stir the pot and gain control.
Precisely. Is that weird act of introducing a third person, real or imagined, not to include, but to divide and kind of twist the connection. And the core paradox is this third person doesn't even have to be present to have power over the dynamic. They just have to exist in your mind.
Right. You could be feeling close to someone, trusting them, and then suddenly they start bringing up someone else, a friend, a colleague, maybe even an ex, talking about how great they are, how funny, how understanding. And you feel that subtle shift, that quiet threat hiding in the compliment directed away from you. Suddenly you're not just in a relationship, you're in a competition you never signed up for. They don't say anything cruel, but you're left wondering, do I measure up?
It's like they're constantly comparing you, making you feel inadequate without ever directly saying it. And the document points out that by bringing someone else into it, they can make you feel unreasonable for feeling insecure about it.
Exactly. You feel the pressure to try harder, change your behavior, not because they asked you to, but because they didn't. The shadow of the third person does all the work, creating tension without direct conflict. You end up competing, but no one told you the rules. And the actual third person.
Yeah.
They might have absolutely no clue they're being used as a pawn in this manipulative game. That's another layer of messed up.
It is. It's not a genuine triangle of connection. It's a triangle of control. You feel compared, measured, not by your own merits, but by their manipulation. Instead of building trust, they're making you fight for their approval. And instead of bringing people closer, it isolates you. You feel jealous, but maybe ashamed of feeling jealous. Insecure, but you hide it to seem strong. The more you care, the worse it gets.
You might think if you just prove yourself, they'll stop bringing up the other person, but often they don't. Because triangulation isn't really about the third person, it's about your reaction. Once they see it works, they keep doing it. They don't need to insult you directly, they just place the third party in the room metaphorically and let your own insecurities do the damage. You create the tension in your own head.
Precisely. You imagine conversations, overanalyze comments, and it just drains you. Even if they say they love you, the triangle persists because now love feels conditional, something you have to earn and might lose to someone else. So you end up becoming smaller, more agreeable, less yourself, trying to be everything they want because you're afraid someone else already is. It's like you're trying to build a deeper bond by constantly performing.
And if you ever confront them, they might act surprised. I was just talking about my friend. You're overthinking it. Why are you so insecure? They flick the blame, making you feel guilty for being hurt. They look innocent while controlling the whole emotional field. It can be something small, a comment, a social media post. They don't need to explicitly say you should be jealous. They just need you to feel it. The third person becomes a tool, a pressure point you can't easily escape.
And even walking away can feel impossible because you're left wondering if they'll just move on to the other person. This tactic creates dependency as your worth gets tied to their closeness to you versus the third party. You stop asking, is this love, and start asking, am I winning? But even when you win, it never feels like enough because the triangle isn't designed to end. It's designed to keep you striving. The third person can be anyone, a past partner, a fictional ideal.
Exactly. Sometimes it's not even about someone better, it's just someone different, and that difference becomes pressure. You get confused about who you're supposed to be for them. The paradox is, while they say they want you, they keep shaping you into someone else. And you might even start resenting the third person, even if they've done nothing wrong. It pulls you away from others, makes you suspicious, anxious, not just with them, but with yourself.
It isolates you emotionally until they become the only one who can relieve the tension they created. Even after the relationship ends, that feeling can linger, leaving you comparing yourself to others, fearing being replaced. And what's interesting is They might not even be fully aware they're doing it. It could be a learned behavior, a way to control without seeming controlling.
Or, as the document chillingly suggests, sometimes they do know, and they kind of enjoy watching you compete, feeling powerful at the top of the triangle. They never have to fully commit. They just shift attention and both sides scramble. That's the real unsettling power of triangulation. Okay, let's tackle another one that feels like pure frustration. Moving the goalpost.
Ah, moving the goalpost. The delightful game where the rules for success keep changing just when you think you finally scored. It's like running a race where someone keeps sneakily adding extra miles right near the finish line. And the core paradox. The harder you try, the further away that finish line seems to get.
Exactly. It creates this silent battlefield in your mind where the rules are constantly, often silently altered. You keep fighting battles that were never really winnable. And it's just so emotionally draining because you pour all this energy into hitting a target that just keeps moving further away. Feels like you're constantly chasing your own tail.
And the manipulator often frames these shifting demands as like a chance for you to grow,
Yeah.
right? Keeping you striving, thinking, okay, just a little more effort, and this time I'll meet their standard. It's manipulation disguised as motivation. You're not driven by genuine ambition anymore. You're pulled along by the fear of never being good enough in their eyes.
Precisely. And any progress you do make, it gets quickly dismissed or it just becomes the new minimum expectation, like pouring water into a leaky bucket it never actually fills up. And you might even start internalizing this pattern, carrying it into other parts of your life, constantly pushing yourself towards some ever-shifting definition of success that isn't even yours.
The document makes a great point. This game isn't really about achievement. It's about maintaining control over your efforts and your self-worth. You're kept in this perpetual state of almost good enough, almost ready, almost respected, constantly fed the idea that success is just one more step away while that step keeps moving. It's how they keep you striving without letting you rest, basically owning your energy.
And even your wins become fuel for their future demands. You show improvement and they hit you with, well, why didn't you do this sooner? Or just silence, making your effort feel invisible the moment happens. You might try to lower your own expectations, but part of you still hopes that the next success will finally unlock their approval. It's heartbreaking, really.
Exactly. You don't just want the goalpost to stop moving, you want it to finally tell you you're enough. But it can't, because that would end their game of control. The game needs you striving, not settling, just insecure enough to keep trying. And even when you leave that situation, the mindset can stick. You set your own goals, but you keep moving them yourself, never quite feeling like you've actually finished.
The external pressure becomes this internalized law. They stop moving the goalposts, but now you do it for them. You could have won ages ago, but you were too busy chasing the next condition they implicitly set. The game was never about your achievement. It was always about their control. Okay, let's move on to a tactic involving a rather creative form of denial. Projection.
Projection. The psychological equivalent of yelling, "I'm not messy, you're messy," while standing ankle-deep in your own clutter.
Precisely. It's a bizarre act of seeing your own unacceptable thoughts, feelings, or behaviors in someone else in you. It's not self-awareness. It's like self-escape aimed outwards. Instead of facing their own stuff, they point it squarely at you, often loudly and confidently accusing you of the very things they're doing.
And the really messed up part, as the document notes, is the more guilty the projector feels, the more convincing they often sound when accusing you. It's like they're trying to convince themselves just as much as they're trying to convince you.
Exactly. It's like throwing their reflection at you and calling it your face. They might accuse you of being angry when they're the furious one, or selfish while they're the one manipulating. Pointing the finger so no one looks at them, especially not themselves, and the more you deny it, the more they insist. Your confusion becomes their proof, your defense becomes evidence. It's this twisted logic aimed right at you.
It is. The paradox gets deeper when the person being projected onto you actually starts to believe it. You question your own motives, wondering, wait, am I really being cruel? They accuse you of something, and you start over-apologizing. Their guilt becomes their escape route, and you're left holding their baggage.
Precisely. Projection is a trick of reversal. They flip the mirror so fast you forget what you were even defending. Now you're on trial for their crime. And what's interesting is how love can amplify projection's power.
How's that? You'd think love would make you see them more clearly.
Because if you care about the person blaming you, you're more likely to actually believe them. Their words dig deeper, not because they're right, but because they matter to you. They might say, you always make everything about you, when they're the ones doing it. It's like they accuse you of exactly what they're doing and say it first to take the high ground. And if you try to point out the hypocrisy, they just accuse you of deflecting.
Exactly. The mirror gets locked, only reflecting their flaws back onto your face. They see their faults clearly, but only on you. Projection often wears this costume of concern, right? Sounds like they're trying to help you, but underneath, it's about dodging their own inner stuff. And the louder they project onto you, the more they silence their own guilt inside. You start changing your behavior to avoid their attacks, even if you don't agree with the blame.
Precisely. You walk carefully, speak gently, edit yourself, not out of agreement, but to keep the peace. But peace never really comes because projection doesn't want peace. It wants relief from their guilt. And it gets that by turning you into the distraction. So they sleep better while you're losing sleep, carrying their guilt and your own confusion. It's a double burden.
And the document raises a really interesting point. The projector might actually believe their own lies about you.
That's where it gets truly complicated. When a lie is repeated often enough, even internally, it starts feeling familiar, and familiarity can feel like truth. So they might genuinely think you are the problem because they've hidden from their own guilt for so long by projecting it. It's like they've convinced themselves so completely they can't even see their own flaws anymore, but they still feel that guilt somewhere, so they just dump it on you.
Exactly. Doesn't matter what it is, jealousy, dishonesty, control, whatever they won't face in themselves, they will find in you. It has to be there. Otherwise, they'd have to look inward. And when you finally try to set a boundary, say, that's not true, they push back harder, accusing you of being avoidant or even gaslighting them. Of a vicious cycle.
It is. The more you defend your truth, the more they twist it. They'll call you the liar while hiding behind their own half-truths. And if you start seeing through it, you face a new kind of pain, realizing the connection wasn't fully real. It was based on their distorted view of you. You weren't truly seen. You were just a screen for them to project onto, a place to dump the parts of themselves they couldn't handle. It's a pretty bleak setup.
It is. You end up carrying guilt that isn't yours, exhausted from defending against a war you never started, while the person who caused it feels blameless. They break you down, then blame you for bleeding. Okay, let's move on to a tactic that involves the strategic use of temptation. Bait and retreat.
Ugh. And bait and retreat. The psychological equivalent of dangling a really tasty donut in front of you and then yanking it away just as you reach for it.
Precisely. It's that trick of offering something good, something desirable, and then pulling it back, not necessarily to punish, but definitely to control. It starts sweet, a promise, a compliment, glimpse of a future, something that lights you up, feels like finally something good is happening. You lean in, get attached to the idea, and then poof, it vanishes.
Quietly, strategically. And the paradox is, the less real the initial offer was, the more real the loss feels. They might promise to be there for you, show up strong at first, then slowly withdraw, leaving you wondering what happened. Like they opened a door, invited you in, then quietly closed it, leaving you disoriented, wondering where the floor went. And they didn't technically take anything from you. They just took back what they never fully intended to give.
Exactly. It's not the initial offer that breaks you, it's the removal of it. Loss doesn't need a long history to hurt. It just needs weight. The weight of the promise, the hope it inspired. That initial offer made you feel wanted, special. Once it's gone, you're left with the echo. And that echo becomes the leash they use to control you. You're no longer acting out of joy. You're acting to try and recapture what you almost had.
Precisely. They dangle something meaningful, watch your reaction, then retreat just enough to trigger that fear of loss in you. You start chasing, trying harder, not because the offer got better, but because it's slipping away. The paradox is you work harder for what's disappearing than for what's actually in your hands. Driven by fear of loss, not joy of gain. They bait you with closeness, then create distance. Bait you with praise, then turn cold. It's this emotional seesaw keeping you off balance.
And you might not even notice it at first, still chasing the high of what was offered. They don't need to demand anything. You offer it yourself, more time, attention, obedience, just to get that feeling back. It's control without confrontation. You do all the work to recover something they never truly gave. And if you confront them, they might play innocent. I never promised you anything.
And often the bait is subtle enough to be deniable, a suggestion, a look, a vague future plan. The paradox is they take back nothing tangible, yet make you feel like you lost everything. You mourn not just the offer, but the version of yourself who believed in it. So you start questioning your perception, what was real, what wasn't. That confusion becomes another form of control. And the better the bait, the worse the retreat feels.
Because now you're measuring your emptiness against what almost was. Doesn't have to be a grand gesture. Could be a promise of emotional safety, a fleeting moment of affection. Once you feel it and lose it, you'll do almost anything to feel it again. It's like you're addicted to the possibility, to the intermittent crumbs of positive attention. And they might reward your efforts just enough to keep you in the game, a random compliment, a brief moment of warmth after the cold shoulder.
It's not genuine giving, it's rationed relief. You start accepting less, celebrating tiny returns like grand gestures. You adjust expectations downwards, blaming yourself when the reward is withdrawn again. The bait makes you feel chosen. The retreat makes you feel replaceable. That swing is addictive. And even when you leave, the pull can linger because you never got closure. You were always chasing something just out of reach.
Precisely. Their absence becomes the control. And sometimes they might not even be fully conscious they're doing it. Could be a learned pattern, give just enough to be needed, pull back to feel wanted. Their power comes from being just out of reach.
Or, as the document notes, it can be fully intentional, a game to test your limits. Bait, retreat, watch, repeat. Learning how to string you along. And the next time, you might not notice until you realize you've given far more than you received and still feel guilty for not giving enough.
You still believe the offer was real, even after it's been pulled away again and again. Tell yourself it'll return if you're just more patient, loyal, perfect. But the truth is, it was never stable. It was a hook, not a gift. The paradox is you fell not for what they gave, but for what they let you believe was possible. Chasing a phantom. Now let's move on to intermittent reinforcement, which feels like a close cousin of bait and retreat.
Ah, yes, intermittent reinforcement. The psychological equivalent of a slot machine. You pull the lever of their attention. Sometimes you get a payout of affection, mostly you get nothing, but that occasional win keeps you absolutely hooked.
Exactly. It's that strange art of rewarding you inconsistently. Just enough to keep you hooked on their approval, but never enough to free you from needing it. One day warmth, the next coldness. One moment attention, then silence. You never know when the affection will come, but when it does, wow, it feels incredibly valuable. And the paradox is, the less consistently you get that positive reinforcement, the more obsessed you can become with trying to get it.
Precisely. It often starts with that initial sweetness, a burst of kindness, a flood of affection. You feel seen, cared for, special. And then, just when you relax into it, poof, it disappears without warning. That inconsistency is the hook. You're left wondering, what did I do wrong? Replaying everything.
And then, just as doubt really starts creeping in, the kindness returns, often feeling even more powerful because it follows that period of absence. The contrast just amplifies the relief, the hope. You start chasing that next reward, thinking, okay, if I just do this right, maybe it'll stay this time. But it doesn't, because the game isn't about giving love. It's about controlling you through the unpredictable delivery of it.
They're not rewarding your behavior to build connection. They're doing it to build dependence. The paradox is brutal. The more inconsistent they are, the more consistent you become in trying to please them. You try harder, wait longer, shrink yourself to avoid triggering the next withdrawal. Your life starts revolving around when they'll give again, and you start confusing those small hits of affection with real love because they're so rare and unpredictable.
It's like your emotional well is constantly running dry because of them. And those intermittent drops feel like a life-saving downpour, even if they're nowhere near enough to actually replenish you.
Exactly. The unpredictability keeps your brain on edge, hopeful, creating the cycle of craving. Even small gestures feel like everything after periods of nothing. Your emotions swing wildly, you lose balance, not because you're weak, but because your nervous system has been trained to chase crumbs.
And if you try to talk about the inconsistency, they might gaslight you, right? Say you're too sensitive, too needy. Now you're doubting your own feelings on top of everything else.
Precisely. You start second-guessing every move, reading their tone like a code, becoming hyper-aware and just emotionally exhausted. Not because you're weak, but because your brain's been wired to survive this unpredictable pattern. And when they do give affection, it feels disproportionately strong, not because their love is deep, but because the absence made you starve for it. It's bait disguised as grace.
You make excuses for them, but deep down you feel the gaps, the uncertainty. Tell yourself to stay calm, hope harder, but the longer you wait, the more you dissolve. The paradox is, they don't need to do much. Just be slightly less cruel than yesterday, and it feels like kindness.
You lower your standards until the floor disappears, and you still call it love. Even after you leave, it can haunt you waiting for messages that don't come, replaying the fleeting highs. The silence that used to hurt now feels normal. Your system adjusted to the pain. This kind of control might not look like blatant abuse, but the effect is deep potential. You lose time, energy, identity, molding yourself into someone easier for them to reward, forgetting who you were before the pattern started.
And the harsh truth is, they might not even realize what they're doing, or they might know exactly. Withholding creates clinging. Inconsistency breeds obsession. You're not addicted to them, you're addicted to the brief relief they sometimes provide from their emotional unavailability.
Exactly. You keep hoping this time will be different, but the very structure is designed not to change. Change would end their power dynamic. So you stay tired, wired, waiting for that next fleeting warmth, falling a little deeper each time, not because you don't see the game, but because the game keeps feeling like love. The more they withhold, the more valuable they become in your mind. Not because they give so much, but because they made you feel lucky to get so little. Okay, let's move on to a tactic that involves a different kind of giving to control. Forced dependency.
Forced dependency.
Right.
The not-so-subtle art of making someone so reliant on you they can barely function without you. It starts with offers of help that slowly erode their ability to help themselves.
Exactly. It's not about genuine support. It's about control disguised as care, looks like assistance, but it's really a trap. They gradually undermine your self-sufficiency, then offer to carry you, removing your legs metaphorically, then becoming your crutch. And the core paradox, as the document states, is the more they help you, the more helpless you actually become.
Precisely. Doesn't start with overt control, but with comfort. Let me handle that. You don't need to worry. I'll take care of it. Feels like love, security. You relax, lean in, let go of responsibilities, skills. And while your hands are open receiving their help, they quietly remove what was yours: choices, tools, your voice. And when you finally try to stand on your own again, you realize you've lost your footing. That dependency, initially feeling like care, has become a cage.
A soft cage, maybe, made of routines and habits they built around you. You forget when you last made a decision without asking them. You stop trusting your own judgment. When you do speak up, your voice feels weak, even to you. They might not be overtly controlling, but they control through your need for them. You need them to drive, decide, guide. Their comfort becomes your main concern.
Exactly. They keep you close by keeping you feeling small, incapable, and they call it love. I just want what's best for you. I worry about you. You're not ready to handle things. These words, seemingly sweet, become bricks building a wall around your life, limiting independence. And if you try to step outside that wall, they might panic, guilt trip you, remind you of all they've done, making you feel indebted and incapable of surviving without them.
That's the moment you realize the help wasn't a gift. It was a debt you never agreed to owe. The more you rely on them, the less you're allowed to grow. Every attempt at independence is met with doubt, fear-mongering. They plant seeds of fear where courage used to be, controlling you quietly through feigned concern. And the paradox deepens when you start doubting yourself, thinking maybe they are right. Maybe you do need them as much as they say.
You lose your voice and call it humility, lose your strength and call it trust, give them power and call it love. But none of it's real unless you're free to walk away. They might offer a semblance of independence, just enough for the illusion, but it's always on a long leash, constant check-ins, expecting you'll come running back.
And when things inevitably go wrong for you, they're right there to rescue you, reinforcing the idea you can't manage alone, becoming both your savior and the reason you keep needing saving. It's a twisted dynamic. The person who saves you is also the one keeping you drowning. And the document suggests they might not even be conscious of it, mistaking control for love, believing they're important by making you need them.
They give help that creates weakness, offer support that takes away skills, feeling proud and essential while slowly erasing the person they claim to love. Or, chillingly, they might know exactly what they're doing, intentionally creating a dependent partner who won't leave. Stripping away freedom piece by piece, calling it structure. But it's a quiet prison.
They keep you close by keeping you uncertain about your abilities, making decisions, fixing problems, while you become passive, nodding, waiting for guidance, forgetting how to function. You lose not just physical freedom, but your sense of self, autonomy. The paradox is brutal. You feel weak because you've been told you are, and then they use that weakness as proof they're right about you meeting them. You think about leaving, but panic sets in because they've trained you to believe you can't survive without them.
The cage isn't locked doors. It's the belief they instilled that you can't walk on your own. It's the cruelest paradox. You believe the chains are your own fault. You asked to be seen, supported, believed in, but got dependence disguised as love. Given everything except the right to need yourself. Okay, let's delve into the art of twisting narratives. Reframing.
Ah, reframing. The linguistic jujitsu where they take an event and, without changing the actual facts, completely alter its interpretation in your mind, like putting a different filter on the same photo to make it look like a whole new scene.
Precisely. Bending perception without touching reality. Shifting the angle, twisting the tone, smoothing sharp edges, painting over hurtful moments with softer colors. And the core paradox. They can lie without ever saying anything factually incorrect.
It starts subtly, right? I wasn't yelling. I was just raising my voice because I care so much. I wasn't ignoring you. I was giving you space. Suddenly, the meaning of the event is flipped.
Exactly. Pain becomes misunderstanding. Cruelty becomes concern. Control becomes protection. And the more they reframe, the more confused you feel because your memory clashes with their sanitized version. You remember the tension, the sting, but they describe it as benign, even positive.
And the more they explain their reframed version, the more you might doubt your own experience. They're not denying what happened, they're just repackaging it. And if that label sounds more reasonable than your raw feelings, you might question your initial reaction. That's the trap. You begin rewriting your own memory, not because the event changed, but because their narrative is more convincing. Reframing is persuasive, making wrong sound right with new words, making feel harmless by shifting focus.
Instead of addressing their hurtful actions, they question your reaction. The burden subtly shifts from them to you.
Precisely. And if you push back, they might stay calm, suggesting you're not seeing the full picture, making you feel narrow-minded for focusing on what hurt. They sound rational while you feel increasingly emotional, maybe irrational.
It's like they've become the narrator of your life, editing the plot. They keep telling the story their way until everyone, maybe even you, starts believing their version. That's the scary part. You start retelling the story in their words, adjusting your own memory, second-guessing your initial emotions. They might portray themselves as patient when you remember distance, honest when you recall cruelty, never taking accountability, just reinterpreting intentions. Which makes it incredibly hard to heal because you're not allowed to name the hurt for what it was. Even when confronted, they skillfully flip the focus back to you and your supposed misinterpretation.
Exactly. I was just trying to help. You misunderstood my tone. Now you're defending not just your memory, but your character, your understanding. The more you try to prove what happened, the more they reframe the conversation itself to focus on your misperceptions. You end up apologizing not for the initial event, but for how you felt about it. And the paradox is, they never had to fully convince you they were right, just that you might be wrong in your perception and feelings.
And when others get involved, the reframed narrative often spreads quickly. They share their calm, convincing version first, while you might seem shaken, emotional, inadvertently looking like the unstable one. It's like they've reframed not just the event, but your character.
Precisely. Reframing doesn't erase what happened, but it changes how it's remembered, explained, judged. Once their frame is accepted, the original truth becomes irrelevant. They might dismiss your honest reaction as overreacting, your sensitivity as weakness, turning your emotional insight against you, using reason as a weapon to invalidate your feelings. You lose not because you were wrong, but because their narrative is more persuasive.
And often, they reframe to avoid their own shame, unable to admit fault, so they rewrite reality. But their intention, even if they convince you it was good, doesn't negate the impact. If you're hurt, you're hurt. Their refusal to acknowledge their part leaves an invisible wound.
The paradox is, the better they get at reframing, the more you might trust them because they sound so logical, while your pain feels like noise. You start believing your emotions are the problem, your memory flawed, your truth less solid than theirs. But deep down, that quiet ache, that persistent question about what really happened, often remains. And that's where breaking free begins, not fighting their version, but learning to trust your internal compass again. Naming what you felt, holding on to your authentic story even when it doesn't fit their frame, reclaiming your narrative. Okay, let's explore how manipulators often work to isolate their targets.
Social isolation. The slow, steady process of cutting someone off from their support network, like building a tall fence around someone's life, one conversation at a time.
Precisely. Doesn't start dramatically. Starts with subtle suggestions, quiet doubts cast on people close to you. I don't think they really support you. Your friends seem jealous. Your family doesn't understand us. Sounds like concern, like pulling you closer, but really they're pushing everyone else away.
And the core paradox is, it can initially feel like you're deepening your bond with them, creating this special insular world, when actually they're distancing you from anyone who could offer a different perspective or challenge their control.
Exactly. You might start believing your connection is unique, superior, that no one else gets it. And the insidious paradox is you might even see the rest of your social world as the problem, as inadequate or threatening to this relationship, the one actively isolating you. They plant those seeds of doubt about friends, family, and slowly they grow into suspicion. You might gradually pull back, cancel plans, share less, not because you want to, but to avoid the tension, the subtle negative reactions from your partner when you spend time with others.
And that's when the isolation really tightens its grip. You realize you're seeing fewer people, having fewer meaningful conversations outside this one relationship. And every time you do try to reach out, they might subtly make it difficult, pouting, acting distant, reinforcing the idea that spending time with others hurts them.
So you unconsciously retreat further, and before you know it, they've become your primary, maybe only, real social contact. The one person you feel you can talk to, even though they're the source of the isolation. The paradox is sharp. They make you feel safer and more understood within the isolation, while removing the people who genuinely care and could offer support. You think they're protecting you from negativity, but they're building a wall to keep you in their control.
And once that wall is high enough, been there long enough, you might forget what those other connections felt like. You become increasingly reliant on the isolator for social, emotional needs, validation, support, companionship.
Not because they forced you, but because they slowly became your entire social landscape. And when one person is your whole world, the thought of losing them is terrifying, even if the relationship is unhealthy. You might sense the distance from others, but they'll have a reasonable explanation framed as love. I just cherish our time. They don't respect us.
Sounds like love. But love that isolates isn't love. It's control wrapped in comforting words. Eventually, you stop sharing significant parts of your life with anyone else, not because you don't want to, but because no one else is really there anymore. The silence outside the bubble grows louder.
And the chilling paradox: the more alone you become, the more desperately you cling to the person who orchestrated it. You feel vulnerable, so you hold tighter to the one remaining connection, not realizing it's what made you vulnerable. You think you're choosing them, but you're operating from survival because losing this last link feels unbearable. So you adapt, agree with their assessments of others, stop questioning, becoming easier to control.
And if someone does try to reach out, offer help, you might push them away, not because you want to, but because you've been trained to doubt their intentions, see concern as interference in your special relationship.
You might end up paradoxically defending the isolator to the few who express concern, blindly protecting the walls of your own prison. The ultimate paradox is when that prison starts feeling safer, more predictable than the daunting freedom outside. You might believe you chose this isolation, grew apart naturally, but healthy connection rarely just dissolves. Isolation in these dynamics is almost always guided.
And by the time you realize how alone you are, it can feel too late, too daunting to rebuild those connections. Reconnecting feels awkward, shameful, like you're an outsider where you once belonged.
That shame can perpetuate the cycle. Easier to stay in the familiar silence than face the truth and rebuild. You might try to convince yourself you don't need anyone else, but deep down, you miss the unfiltered laughter, unbiased advice, feeling known by people with no need to control you. And the isolator might genuinely believe they're being protective, failing to see that protecting you from everyone eventually protects you from your own thoughts, feelings, choices. Healthy love thrives on autonomy. Love that doesn't trust you to think, feel, choose becomes emotional ownership.
And the strangest part, the more isolated you become, the harder it is to even recognize it. Your thoughts echo theirs, self-doubts come in their voice, reality aligns with their version. Even if they left, the effects linger because you've been cut off. You find yourself in a profound quiet, told you're loved but feeling cut off, assured you're cared for but feeling confused, and the only voice close enough keeps saying they're all you need. That's the chilling paradox of social isolation. They make your world disappear, then declare themselves your whole world. Okay, let's move to the subtle art of fear implantation.
Fear implantation, yeah. Unlike overt threats, this involves gently introducing anxieties, doubts, making someone feel watched, unsafe, even without a real external threat.
It's like planting a tiny seed of worry that grows into this huge tree of anxiety, casting a shadow over everything. And the paradox is the target might feel intensely watched, on edge, even when no one is actually looking.
It often starts innocuously, maybe sharing a vague but unsettling story. Something bad that happened to someone else. You hear it, file it away, and next time you feel a flicker of doubt, that story resurfaces, creating this low-level unease.
Suddenly, you might see potential dangers everywhere, hear warning bells, become hyper-alert, checking locks, scrutinizing faces. And the person who planted the seed often positions themselves as the only source of safety in this newly perceived dangerous world.
Exactly. Fear takes root best not with a shout, but a quiet whisper of concern slipping beneath logical thinking. You might hesitate, hold back from goals, and every time you question your new caution, the manipulator is there to confirm your fears with seemingly caring words.
I'm just looking out for you. You were lucky I mentioned that. Imagine what could have happened. They become the vigilant protector, but really, they're the one wielding the anxiety.
The paradox here is cruel. The more anxious you feel about the world, the more you might trust and rely on the very person who caused those feelings, because they're offering comfort, explanations, a path to safety, solving a problem they subtly created.
Fear, when implanted like this, doesn't always look like panic attacks. It can be subtle hesitation, a nagging gut feeling that isn't really yours. Thinking about worst-case scenarios, not because they're likely, but because the idea was planted and nurtured.
Exactly. A casual comment, a worried look, often just enough to keep you slightly uncertain, on edge. That's how control is established, not making you afraid of them, but making you afraid of everything else.
And the more pervasive the fear, the smaller your world gets. You avoid risks, hesitate with new people, lose trust in your own judgment, while the manipulator nods approvingly at your caution, reinforcing the fears they implanted.
They might frame it as teaching wisdom, but really, they're teaching obedience to their implicit warnings, keeping you under their influence. The paradox is, the fears don't even have to be real, just plausible in your mind. A quiet suggestion is often more powerful than a direct command.
You obey not because someone told you to, but because your thoughts have been reshaped to align with the implanted fears. Constantly anticipating danger, relying more on their guidance.
And even staying still starts to feel like the safest option, but it's an illusion. You're not avoiding real danger. You're avoiding imagined threats that keep you psychologically frozen. The manipulator might frame this inactivity as maturity, but they've blurred your vision.
They've swapped confidence for constant caution, your voice for silence. The trick is, you might eventually stop questioning the source of the anxiety. That's when it's most effective, when you don't remember where the fear even began.
The implanted fears become so ingrained they feel like your own thoughts, self-doubts. And if you resist, they might switch tactics, act hurt, surprised by your distrust, reinforcing their caring protector image, making you feel guilty for doubting them.
The paradox sharpens. The person who made you afraid now presents themselves as your only protector. You turn to them for comfort, further solidifying their control.
Fear makes you easier to guide. And because the anxiety feels internal, the manipulation is often invisible to outsiders. You just seem cautious, maybe nervous, no one suspects the cause.
Even when nothing bad happens, the fear still wins for the manipulator because it creates self-doubt, weakens self-trust. You avoid things just in case, reinforcing the implanted fears.
Eventually, you might forget who you were before the fear took root, before every choice felt fraught with warning. Don't recall the initial moments, just remember gradually becoming more cautious, hesitant, smaller.
And the ultimate paradox.
Yeah.
You live in a cage with no visible locks. You could leave, but the implanted fear whispers the outside world is more dangerous than their control. So you stay, subconsciously obeying the voice that taught you fear. That's the insidious power of fear implantation. Okay, let's move to skillfully dodging responsibility. Shifting blame.
Shifting blame, yeah. It's more than just avoiding fault. It's actively redirecting responsibility onto someone else, making them feel like they're suddenly holding this hot potato of guilt they never touched.
So it's like tripping over your own feet and immediately pointing at the rug, yelling, "You tripped me!" And the core paradox. The more mistakes the manipulator makes, the more guilty others around them might feel.
Exactly. Something goes wrong, conflict, failed project, broken promise, and before anyone processes it, the manipulator deflects. Well, you should have reminded me. If you hadn't reacted that way, the focus instantly shifts away from their actions.
And the person receiving the blame starts intensely questioning themselves. Did I somehow cause this? So busy searching their own memory for flaws, they don't address the manipulator's initial action.
That's the clever shift. The paradox is stark. The manipulator messes up, yet you walk away feeling worse about your often imagined contribution. And because you care about the relationship, you might subconsciously shoulder the blame to keep the peace, further eroding your self-trust.
You don't need to yell, just sow subtle seeds of doubt about your memory, behavior, intentions. Suddenly you're on the defensive, justifying yourself rather than holding them accountable.
Precisely. Even when it's objectively clear it's their fault, they can twist the narrative, maybe highlighting some minor detail in your reaction. Suddenly the discussion is about how you handled their mistake, eclipsing the mistake itself.
They don't need to erase their errors, just create enough distraction and confusion by pointing fingers. Blame becomes a spotlight they aim wherever they want.
And the person consistently blamed starts adapting, becoming quieter, overly cautious, apologizing constantly, not because they're guilty, but because they've been conditioned to expect blame whenever things go wrong.
The paradox becomes disheartening. You might even start preemptively apologizing before anything happens, taking responsibility for potential future problems just to avoid their inevitable accusations. Your confidence fades as their confidence in their own blamelessness grows.
This doesn't always come from malice. Sometimes it's avoiding their own weakness or shame, but the effect on the target is the same: confusion, hurt, unfair guilt.
And when things go well, they take full credit. But when things go wrong, blame scatters like broken glass, and anyone cut feels subtly at fault for being nearby.
The longer it goes on, the harder it is to recognize the pattern. Your memory gets clouded by guilt, you lose trust in your perceptions, your ability to assess responsibility.
The final, insidious twist. The manipulator might not even need to actively shift blame anymore. The target starts doing it automatically, assuming they are the cause of the manipulator's moods, frustrations, reactions.
And the manipulator, consciously or not, often lets them believe it. Because if you think you're at fault, you'll work harder to fix things, not by asking them to change, but by relentlessly trying to change yourself to accommodate them.
If the person being blamed finally speaks up, suggests something feels unfair, the manipulator often doubles down, turning the attempt at communication into another thing to blame them for.
That's how the cycle repeats, the trap stays sealed, the manipulator becomes untouchable, not because they never err, but because the consequences never land on them.
And maybe, over time, the manipulator starts genuinely believing their own blameless narrative, having shifted responsibility so often their own reality gets distorted. But the hurt and confusion in the target's eyes often tell the real story.
Exactly. They stay clean by making others feel dirty with undeserved guilt. And the more the target pairs, the more readily they might believe the problems and guilt are theirs to fix. That's the deceptive paradox of shifting blame. Now, let's move to the subtle weapon of disappointment. Guilt tripping.
Guilt tripping. The emotional art of making someone feel awful for daring to prioritize their own needs or set boundaries. Not loud anger, more a quiet sigh, heavy silence, a look of deep disappointment.
Precisely. Softer than aggression, but incredibly effective. Disappointment dressed as love or concern, downcast eyes, long silences, heavy sighs. Rarely "you must do this," more pointed, "I didn't expect this from you."
And the core paradox. You're not forced to do anything, but the emotional pressure makes saying no feel impossible. It preys on empathy, the desire to be seen as good and caring.
Works best on kind-hearted, considerate people, conflict-averse ones who overthink their impact. Ironically, their goodness becomes the weapon used against them.
You do something reasonable, set a boundary, state a need, and the guilt tripper looks at you like you've committed some terrible betrayal. Not anger, just sadness, deep hurt. Suddenly, you're the bad guy for taking care of yourself.
Exactly. They rarely say you're wrong, just express profound disappointment, maybe subtly remind you of past favors or sacrifices, creating this heavy sense of emotional debt. Now your reasonable actions are weighed down by guilt for their perceived unhappiness.
The person, initially trying to protect their time or energy, suddenly second-guesses their valid needs. Maybe I'm being selfish.
And that's how guilt rewrites decisions, not through logic, but emotional manipulation. You make choices not because they feel right, but emotionally safer, keeping the peace, stopping the disappointment. You might rationalize it as kindness, but deep down, it's fear of their reaction.
The paradox. You think you're doing what's best for everyone, but guilt convinces you everyone primarily means the guilt tripper. And even when you give in, you're left drained, resentful, feeling like you betrayed yourself.
Precisely. The guilt tripper might thank you profusely for doing something that made you feel smaller, framing it as proof of love, but you know it was pressure, not respect. The paradox deepens when the guilt tripper might not even be consciously aware, genuinely believing you're being unfair.
They might mistake emotional leverage for accountability. It's rarely an honest conversation about needs, more a subtle tug of war using your conscience and empathy against you.
You try explaining your perspective, hoping for understanding, but the guilt tripper isn't interested in understanding. They want compliance, cessation of the discomfort their disappointment causes. Once you cave, they relax until next time your needs conflict with theirs.
Because it's rarely a one-off, becomes an ingrained pattern. You try saying no, they react with disappointment, you feel intensely bad, change your mind. Over time, it internalizes you guilt trip yourself, anticipating their reaction.
You start preemptively saying yes to things you decline, just to avoid the anticipated guilt wave. Stop trusting your own healthy boundaries because they consistently come with this huge emotional cost. And the worst part, you might internalize the guilt, truly believing prioritizing your well-being is selfish. But it isn't. You've just been conditioned to feel that way.
They use loaded phrases, right? After everything I've done, I guess I just don't matter. These subtle jabs cut deep because you do strive to be good and caring. Guilt targets the heart, not logic.
They might accuse you of changing, becoming less caring, making your growth seem like betrayal. They might push you away, then blame you for the distance.
You try explaining calmly, reasonably, being strong yet soft. But it rarely lands because guilt tripping isn't about hearing you. It's about getting you to fold. If you don't fold, the guilt intensifies.
Even when you give in, something breaks inside. Resentment builds because you know it was manipulation, not willingness. But here's a crucial truth. Guilt only works if you are caring and empathetic. Your conscience is strong. You've just been manipulated into forgetting. Boundaries are self-care, essential for healthy relationships. The guilt tripper taught you saying no is hurtful, but what's truly hurtful is being constantly asked to betray your needs in the name of love or obligation. It's possible to be good and honor your boundaries. So you end up carrying guilt that isn't yours, doing things from pressure, not desire. That's the insidious paradox of guilt tripping. Okay, let's move into the often dramatic world of victim playing.
Victim playing. The theatrical art of turning the tables so you end up apologizing to the person who wronged you, like setting a house on fire, then coughing dramatically in the smoke, demanding sympathy.
Precisely. A manipulative strategy flipping responsibility. The person causing pain acts like they're suffering most, avoiding accountability by taking the role of the primary injured party.
And the core paradox is astounding. The more damage they cause, the more sympathy they often manage to get, including from the person they harmed.
Exactly. Rarely starts with admitting fault. Often begins with orchestrated emotion tears, trembling voice, pained expression. Focus immediately shifts from their behavior to their intense feelings, derailing any talk of accountability.
These phrases like, "I never meant to hurt you," and suddenly the person genuinely harmed feels compelled to apologize for their valid feelings of hurt. Came seeking acknowledgement, leave feeling guilty for having those feelings.
That's the subtle flip. They use vulnerability as emotional armor. When the harmed person tries explaining their perspective, the victim player might break down. Natural compassion takes over, inadvertently silencing your own feelings.
You want to stand up for yourself, but hesitate, not wanting to seem cruel to someone in distress. So you back down, and the real issue gets lost in the drama of their supposed suffering.
Precisely. They don't defend their actions. They defend their feelings. And emotions, especially overwhelming pain, are harder to challenge. The harmed person ends up comforting the person who caused the pain, roles completely reversed without anyone noticing the manipulation.
They use dramatic statements, right? I try my best, but no one understands how hard things are for me. Suddenly, your honest expression of hurt is framed as an unfair attack. Your truth, too much for their fragility. Your pain dismissed as less significant.
And if you press for accountability, they might shut down dramatically. This is why I can't talk to anyone. Everyone turns on me. Now you're still dealing with the original hurt and defending yourself against implications of being unfair.
You start doubting your perception. Did I overreact? Are they really suffering more? Victim playing excels at creating confusion, making you second-guess your emotional reality.
Exactly. The core isn't seeking understanding or acknowledging fault. It's crafting a narrative where they are the central figure of injustice, regardless of their actual role. Fragility becomes a shield against accountability.
The paradox is striking. The more harmful their behavior, the more broken they might appear, drawing sympathy not from remorse, but a convincing performance of suffering.
And if the performance is believable, others, including the harmed person, might not question the script. You walk away confused, having offered comfort instead of receiving accountability.
You might even feel guilty for trying to set boundaries or ask for clear communication, feeling mean for expressing needs in the face of their overwhelming suffering. The person who should apologize has skillfully maneuvered to receive your apology.
They don't need to be loud, just consistently appear wounded, fragile. Their crafted pain often silences logic, derails productive conversation, not direct argument, strategic breakdown to escape scrutiny.
It becomes a pattern. You bring up an issue, they pivot to their pain, turning every conversation into a bizarre competition of who suffered more, where your feelings become irrelevant.
They use invalidating statements. You have no idea what I've been through, dismissing your current experience. You try addressing the situation, they stay stuck on past traumas, making you feel cruel for bringing them back to the present.
They use past wounds as an emotional wall, making accountability impossible. You walk on eggshells while your needs go unmet.
And often others rally around the perceived victim, hearing only their narrative. The person trying to address the issue paradoxically looks like the aggressor.
You might hide your own hurt to avoid being labeled heartless, suppressing anger, because only their emotions are allowed space.
Even when you know you're being manipulated, it works because it plays on compassion, the paradox. Your care is twisted against you, preventing you from asserting needs.
And when they do apologize, it's often so laden with self-pity it shifts focus right back to them. You're left feeling heavy, like you caused their distress.
The more you assertively stand your ground, the more convincingly they craft their victim narrative. The more gentle you are, the more skillfully they draw you back into their web.
So you're left tired, guilty, silenced, facing someone who breaks rules, then cries when called out. That's the frustrating paradox of victim playing. Okay, let's delve into those psychologically tangled situations where you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. Double binds.
Double binds, yes, those insidious psychological traps with no clear positive way out. No matter which choice you make, you end up perceived as wrong, inadequate, or facing negative consequences. It's a setup where both options lead to bad outcomes, and even explaining your reasoning seems to prove their flawed point.
It's like being told, very seriously, just be spontaneous. The core paradox is you can follow the explicit rules, yet still somehow break the unspoken ones.
Exactly. You're told to be honest, so you share feelings, only to be told you're too harsh or sensitive. Next time, you're diplomatic, then accused of being secretive or passive-aggressive. Speak up, you're disrespectful, stay quiet, you're unengaged. It's not about what you do. It's ensuring whatever you do can be twisted against you.
The rules keep shifting without warning. Someone needs space, so you give it, then get accused of being cold or not caring. They ask you to open up, you do, then get labeled selfish, dramatic, or too intense.
You try listening to their contradictory messages, desperate to understand unspoken expectations, but every attempt leads back to feeling like you failed. You live in perpetual tension, walking on eggshells. Agree, you're weak. Decline, you're selfish. Compromise backfires, accused of playing both sides or not being committed.
The insidious part is you start believing you are the problem. If every choice leads to conflict, it's natural to assume you're doing something wrong. You redouble efforts to get it right, even though right keeps shifting.
The person creating the bind might claim to hate drama, yet manufacture explosions when you try keeping things simple. Profess to value honesty, then punish you when the truth is inconvenient. It's maddening contradiction.
And the more you twist yourself to please them, the more they might accuse you of being inconsistent or inauthentic. You get exhausted trying to solve an unsolvable equation, the paradox. It looks like a solvable problem, but the problem is the questions and expectations. You weren't meant to succeed, just struggle and feel inadequate.
The struggle itself is often key to their control, and they stay above it, appearing calm, maybe confused by your distress, while holding both ends of the paradoxical rope. The harder you fight, the more entangled you get. Explanations are twisted into excuses. You might even be accused of playing the victim while trapped in their no-win scenario.
Eventually, the natural response is to give up trying to win and just focus on minimizing damage. You emotionally shrink, avoid conflict, not out of agreement, but sheer exhaustion.
And the paradox deepens. You feel like you're losing your voice to avoid being silenced. This pattern can manifest anywhere, leaving you off balance, confused, questioning your sanity.
Even when you think you've figured out the rules, believe you found the action that won't backfire, it often still does. They find something, tone, word choice, timing to put you back in the wrong.
Peace is an illusion. Only reluctant compliance is offered, and even that's rarely enough. You might blame yourself for not seeing the trap sooner, not being smart enough, but that self-blame is just another layer of the bind.
You're stuck between two stories. Either you are naive for believing the initial message, or weak for not meeting impossible expectations. Either way, you lose self-respect.
Some use double binds consciously to confuse and control, others unconsciously, driven by internal conflicts. But the impact is the same, feeling perpetually trapped.
And the cruelest twist, when they claim it's your choice how you respond, as if you're free when every option leads to punishment. Choice becomes a painful illusion.
And if you point out the contradictions, they might gaslight you, accuse you of being paranoid, sensitive, twisting words, making you feel irrational for reacting to the chaos they created.
You feel like you're walking a straight line in a room where walls and floor keep shifting, trying to be good by rules that constantly change and are often unspoken. That's the frustrating, damaging paradox of the double bind. Okay, now let's move to a more insidious tactic that slowly erodes who you are: identity undermining.
Identity undermining. Yeah, not a direct assault, but a subtle, gradual chipping away at self-worth, confidence, your fundamental sense of self. Through seemingly harmless teasing, backhanded compliments disguised as jokes, persistent negative comments framed as helpful.
Like constant little pinpricks of negativity, barely noticeable individually, but they accumulate, leaving you deflated, less sure, questioning your value. And the paradox: the person doing it makes you feel smaller while claiming they're just trying to help you grow.
Often starts with things personal to you, passions, quirks, what makes you you. Share something exciting, they respond with a subtle eye roll, dismissive chuckle, playful but undermining comment disguised as humor.
Rarely feels like a direct attack, but plants that tiny seed of self-doubt. And the paradox: the more harmless it sounds, the deeper the impact over time.
You unconsciously adjust, downplay interests, not because you changed your mind, but to avoid their subtle mockery or disdain. Second-guess yourself in moments that used to feel natural, wondering if you'll invite criticism.
Not blatant cruelty, but that persistent drip, drip, drip. Share enthusiasm, they diminish it. Express joy, they dim your light. Then accuse you of being too sensitive if you react negatively to their joke.
Exactly. Now you're hurt and feel foolish for being hurt by just a joke. That's the trap. They don't need to destroy your self-esteem, just create that quiet hum of self-doubt in the background.
Over time, you question your intelligence, worth, preferences, even memories. And the more you hear that subtle, negative inner voice, often echoing their comments, the more it sounds like your own monologue.
And here's the twisted part. They do this while claiming they love you, are only trying to help you grow, see things realistically. The wound comes wrapped in affection or concern, making it hard to identify the harm.
You gradually stop noticing the precious parts of yourself that went quiet: hobbies abandoned, spontaneous laughter gone, unique perspectives unshared. Might rationalize it as evolving, but really you're shrinking to fit their narrow comfort zone.
And if you push back, challenge their criticisms. They skillfully deflect, acting shocked you can't take a joke or take things too personally. Your valid defense becomes the next problem they point out, burying the original harm.
The paradox is effective. The more you try holding onto your authentic self, the more dramatic or defensive they suggest you are. But if you passively let go to avoid criticism, they might later lament you've changed or become less interesting. A no-win.
They might subtly compare you to others, highlighting others' strengths to make you feel inadequate. You unconsciously measure your worth by their shifting standards, forgetting your inherent value isn't earned through approval.
Slowly, how you describe yourself changes: more apologetic, uncertain, hesitant. You self-edit even before they comment.
Might feel shame just for being authentically you. The paradox is brutal. You instinctively protect yourself from the negativity of someone you might still believe is trying to protect you.
Doesn't always come from malice. Sometimes their own insecurities need to feel superior. But your identity shouldn't shrink for someone else to feel bigger. Healthy love makes you feel more yourself, not less.
But when someone consistently chips away at your sense of self, they make you easier to control, less confident, more eager for their fleeting approval. Even positive compliments can feel laced with a put-down.
The harsh truth: they often saw your light, your strengths, and instead of celebrating them, tried to dim them to feel secure. You're left quieter, confused, wondering when the vibrant version of yourself began to fade. That's the insidious paradox of identity undermining. Now let's look at the relentless effect of incessant criticism.
Incessant criticism. Right. Not one big blow, but a persistent pattern of pointing out flaws, mistakes, shortcomings, often disguised as helpful feedback. A slow erosion of self-worth and confidence.
Like a tiny, nagging voice constantly whispering your imperfections. And the paradox: the more you try to improve and meet their expectations, the more flaws the critic finds.
Precisely. Disguised as honesty, just being honest, or desire for your growth, only say this because I care, but the help never feels helpful. Just relentless pressure to meet an ever-shifting, impossibly high standard. They remind you of every misstep, forgotten detail, less than perfect outcome, making you feel perpetually inadequate.
At first, you might genuinely try listening, working to improve. But the criticism keeps coming. Fix one thing, they find another. Apologize for a mistake, they suggest you're just making excuses.
Feels like no matter what you do, something's wrong. You gradually feel like you are the problem, even when striving your best. Criticism isn't always angry. It can be calm, polite, but its relentless nature wears you down.
It's those small, constant, critical comments that accumulate, eroding self-belief until you question nearly every decision. You walk on eggshells, anticipating negative feedback, bracing for corrections.
Your effort might increase as you try harder to please. But ironically, so does the criticism. The more energy you invest, the more they take it for granted, focusing only on new inadequacies. You stop feeling pride. Focus shifts solely to avoiding disapproval.
You live in constant anxiety, not from real danger, but because the criticism replaced inner peace. Rehearsing actions, bracing for commentary.
They might claim they want your best, but your best is never enough. Improvement rarely silences critique, just leads to new flaws. You're rarely praised, often subtly punished for not already being perfect.
If you express how the negativity affects you, they might dismiss your feelings too sensitive, dramatic, can't handle feedback, never taking responsibility for the weight of their words.
Exactly. Apologies, if they come, feel hollow, insincere. The pattern rarely changes. Over time, you forget what confidence feels like. Finishing something without bracing for flaw finding.
Their negative voice becomes your inner critic, their negativity your companion. You avoid risks, new things, not from disinterest, but fear of commentary. Trapped in not enough.
The paradox. You expend energy trying to win back self-worth. Their words actively steal. Even when they're not present, their critical voice echoes, undermining confidence.
Sadly, you might start believing their negative assessments more than positive feedback from others. Their relentless criticism wore you down, leaving you unsure of your abilities. Value.
The harsh truth. You were never the problem. You just began to believe you were because they consistently pointed the finger of inadequacy at you. That's the insidious paradox of incessant criticism.
Now let's examine a more public form of control. Public humiliation.
Public humiliation.
Mhm.
The deliberate act of degrading or belittling someone in front of others. Not constructive feedback, making a pointed, painful example in public.
Targets not just behavior, but dignity, social standing. A private matter turned into public spectacle, often veiled as teaching a lesson or being honest.
Like loudly correcting a minor error in a crowded room with a megaphone. Goal isn't accuracy, often asserting power.
Exactly. Creates a chilling effect. Step out of line, you could be next. Obedience comes not from respect, but fear of similar embarrassment.
And that intense shame lingers long after, replaying the moment, agonizing over words, looks, questioning self-worth, belonging.
The truth. The person humiliated wasn't just corrected, they were used. Their mistake became a tool for the orchestrator to assert dominance. Discomfort became public entertainment or a cautionary tale.
Even if framed later as toughening you up or brutal honesty, there's a clear line between private feedback and intentional public embarrassment.
And if the humiliator knows the negative impact, it becomes even more calculated. They understand shame. Silences, controls, makes people conform.
The person humiliated might hide future mistakes, but also genuine emotions, thoughts, questions, fearing becoming the next target.
The irony. Public humiliation rarely fosters learning or improvement, often creates paralyzing fear, anxiety, doesn't build trust, breeds resentment, fear, avoidance. But the paradox. It can be effective for short-term compliance because people desperately avoid being shamed.
Others witnessing might laugh along, not because it's funny, but self-preservation aligning with power to avoid becoming the target. The environment devolves. Safety prioritized over honesty, empathy.
Precisely. Authenticity replaced by strategic conformity, careful navigation, avoiding situations that might lead to shaming.
Painful memories internalized become a constant warning, shaping future behavior, interactions, self-worth long after the event. That's the chilling paradox of public humiliation.
Okay, let's look at a tactic playing on our desire for social agreement. False consensus.
False consensus. Creating the impression everyone else agrees with an idea, whether they do or not.
Like confidently stating, well, common knowledge, or everyone knows, even without evidence. The paradox. People outwardly agree not because they believe it, but to avoid being the lone dissenter.
Exactly. Creates an illusion of a large invisible crowd sharing the opinion. Phrases like, let's be honest, or clearly the only way. Shut down discussion, implying the matter's settled.
Disagreeing becomes more than having a different opinion. Feels like standing alone against a majority, risking social discomfort, exclusion.
Precisely. Doesn't need facts. Relies on confident delivery, subtle cues implying agreement. Questioning it makes you feel out of step.
But often that crowd doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
Most might be silent due to uncertainty, holding private reservations, But the confident assertion discourages dissent.
Exactly. Plays on our need for belonging, fear of isolation. We compromise genuine beliefs to avoid challenging the perceived norm.
And over time, if used effectively, targets might start believing the false consensus themselves, forgetting their initial reservations, inadvertently become part of the manufactured crowd.
The paradox deepens as those influenced perpetuate the illusion, repeating the viewpoint, contributing to the manufactured agreement that initially silenced them, a self-fulfilling prophecy.
But sometimes, one person bravely breaks the silence, expresses dissent. Others might be relieved they're not alone. The illusion crumbles when even one speaks out.
Prolonged silence often isn't agreement. It's shared fear of being first to disagree. Once one breaks the ice, others feel safer revealing true thoughts.
But usually, false consensus holds not from shared belief, but fear of being the one who doesn't agree. And the person creating the illusion wields unearned social power. That's the deceptive paradox of false consensus. Now, let's move to borrowing perceived authority. Appeal to authority.
Appeal to authority bypasses proving a point with evidence. Claims something is true or should be done simply because someone in perceived power says so.
Like saying, my doctor says so, expecting that ends discussion, even if the topic isn't their expertise. The paradox. The user might have no real authority themselves, just borrowing someone else's perceived authority.
Exactly. Often starts with name-dropping, my boss agrees. Experts state, without specifics or evidence. Relies on the claim going unchallenged.
If you ask for specifics or challenge validity, they might get defensive, dismissive, because the tactic relies on unquestioning acceptance of the cited authority.
Sometimes the authority is legitimate, but misused to force compliance, not explain rationale. Boils down to, believe this because someone higher up said so.
And sometimes the authority is fabricated, exaggerated, quoted out of context. But if it sounds official, it can be surprisingly persuasive.
Precisely. The more insecure someone feels, the more they might rely on borrowed authority, dressing up personal opinions as objective facts by hiding behind someone else's credibility.
The receiver is in a tricky spot. Disagreeing feels like questioning not just the individual, but a system, established authority, respected figure. Can feel intimidating.
That's key. You might sense something's off, but feel like you're disrespectful, overly skeptical, failing to recognize wisdom. Expected to trust the chain of command even when the authority is vague or unsubstantiated.
Shows up everywhere. Personal life, work, debates. Conveniently shuts down discussion, stifles dissent, exerts control without logical justification.
Exactly. Sometimes from insecurity, a shortcut to winning. Other times, a strategic move to silence opposition.
But genuine authority doesn't need borrowing or aggressive assertion. True wisdom speaks for itself. Real leadership involves explaining rationale, open dialogue, not hiding behind titles.
So, next time you hear an appeal to authority, politely ask for specifics not to argue, but because sound reasoning shouldn't need to hide behind borrowed credibility. The paradox. The less actual power they have, the more aggressively they might pretend someone else bestowed authority on their argument.
Okay, let's delve into the emotionally charged territory of emotional blackmail.
Emotional blackmail. The subtle art of using loved one's emotions and vulnerabilities against them to get what you want. Not direct threats, manipulative threats to their emotional well-being or your own.
Precisely. Softer than force, but potentially more damaging. It subtly conveys, if you do this, I'll be devastated, or if you leave, I'll never recover. Sounds like vulnerability, but operates as unspoken control. And the core paradox, chillingly noted, the manipulated person often ends up apologizing to the manipulator.
Exactly. Often starts with distress, look, sigh, fragile tone. Rarely direct demands, they subtly crumble. And suddenly you feel responsible for their emotional state.
They use seemingly loving phrases.
Yeah.
You're the only one who understands. If you really loved me, you'd never. Laying the weight of their happiness, stability, squarely on your shoulders.
Even without explicit threats, the message is clear. Your choices have profound consequences for their emotional well-being. Saying no isn't just disagreement. It carries the weight of causing them lasting pain.
So your choices get dictated by fear of their reaction, causing distress, repercussions. Setting a boundary feels selfish, cruel. Leaving feels like betrayal.
Precisely. You stay or comply not because you want to, but fear of what they might do to themselves, the relationship. Yet they frame it as deep love, devotion.
Sometimes it's not threats of self-harm. Subtle reminders of past sacrifices, creating unspoken emotional debt impossible to repay.
You walk carefully, monitor words, avoid triggering their next crisis. rationalize compliance as kindness, but really, you're held hostage by their cultivated vulnerability.
The paradox. You try being strong, supportive, responsible, but carry a crushing emotional weight not yours to bear, sacrificing your needs, boundaries for their perceived fragility.
And the blackmailer, while maybe genuinely feeling hurt or fear, crosses an ethical line by trapping you, holding you responsible for their emotional regulation. Pain doesn't justify manipulation.
You become their primary emotional lifeline, solely responsible for their happiness, survival, an unsustainable, unfair burden in any healthy relationship.
Exactly. You cancel plans, ignore needs, say yes when you want to say no, driven by fear of their reaction or withdrawal of affection. They create a distorted world where your strength paradoxically holds them together.
Even trying healthy distance can result in escalated threats, more drama, pulling you back in, trapped in an endless cycle of threat and compliance.
Their empathy becomes their weapon. If you explain how unfair it feels, they might crumble further, reinforcing your guilt, making it impossible to assert needs.
It's a cage built not of bars, but misplaced compassion, obligation. Your desire to care is twisted into control. You might even mistake this intense dependency for true love, coercion for intimacy.
But genuine love doesn't trap. Healthy connection doesn't need threats. Emotional blackmail holds your peace of mind hostage. The paradox. You get so enmeshed, you lose sense of where your feelings end and theirs begin, making choices based on their fears, not your truth. Left feeling guilty for not managing another adult's emotions.
Okay, finally, let's look at a tactic playing on fear of missing out. Scarcity illusion.
Scarcity illusion. Classic marketing trick makes something seem rare or limited time only to pressure quick, impulsive decisions, but it works in interpersonal manipulation too.
Precisely. Creating false urgency or limited availability to control choices.
Often involves saying things like, "This amazing opportunity disappears forever if you don't commit now, even if the opportunity is questionable." The paradox. Making something seem rare so you don't recognize your own value and rush into bad choices.
Exactly. Using phrases like, limited time offer, don't miss out. Triggering FOMO, compelling impulsive action without full consideration.
The artificial urgency overrides rational thought, gut feelings. They plant doubt. Will you ever get another chance? Making you question hesitation.
It's a way to undermine self-worth, making you feel the current, possibly flawed offer is the best you'll ever get.
Exactly. They create urgency knowing if you had time to think, you might see through the illusion.
Like whispering, hurry, act now, or regret it forever, even if the path is unhealthy.
And even when you sense pressure, it's hard to walk away from the perceived limited opportunity because FOMO holds sway.
You doubt your judgment, wonder if you're too cautious, letting a good thing slip away.
But truly valuable things rarely need aggressive tactics of manufactured scarcity. They stand on merit, the paradox. Making something seem rare so you overlook your own worth, rushing for something less valuable than believed.
You end up making hasty decisions based on fear, not desire or reason, with potentially lasting negative consequences. So focused on the ticking clock, you fail to assess the actual offer.
Precisely. And the person creating scarcity knows this pressure overrides logic, leading to choices you might regret.
It's a tactic preying on anxiety, fear of regret, making us jump into situations without fully considering consequences or true value. That's the power of the scarcity illusion.
Indeed. A potent tool for control, compelling action against better judgment out of fear of missing something deceptively presented as valuable.
Well, this has been a truly eye-opening, maybe deeply unsettling deep dive into these psychological warfare tactics that, yeah, can turn you into a puppet.
It has. We've covered a lot from gaslighting messing with your reality, to love bombing's overwhelming control, to the quiet damage of isolation.
And the common thread, as you've heard, is often the exploitation of our own minds, our emotions, our very human needs, turning them against us. Each tactic seems to have this disturbing paradox at its core.
Absolutely. And what's really crucial, for anyone listening is just recognizing these tactics is the first most vital step towards untangling their hold. Awareness is power here. It helps you regain control of your own story, your choices.
So as you go about your day, maybe think about how these subtle puppet strings might be at play in your own life or just in the world around you. Seeing them is definitely the first step to cutting them.
It is. Trust your gut, question things, and remember your reality, your feelings. They are valid. They matter.
Thanks for tuning in to the Despicable Maine Deep Dive podcast. Remember, living in Despicable Maine is theft of your life.